Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Reading Corner with MooseChangerPat. That's me, in case you're wondering. Today we are reading Chapter 17 of Pawn of Prophecy. And as always, you should buy the original work by David Eddings to support the original work. Yeah. Anyway, Chapter 17. Beric, Garen called through the door after he had knocked for several minutes without any answer. Go away, Beric's voice came thickly through the door. Beric, it's me, Garen. I have to talk with you. There was a long silence inside the room, and finally a slow movement. Then the door opened. Beric's appearance was shocking. His tunic was rumpled and stained. His red beard was matted. The long braids he usually wore were undone, and his hair was tangled. The haunted look in his eyes, however, was the worst. The look was a mixture of horror and self-loathing so naked that Garen was forced to avert his eyes. You saw it, didn't you, boy? Beric demanded. You saw what happened to me out there? I didn't really see anything, Garen said carefully. I hit my head on that tree, and all I really saw were stars. You must have seen it, Beric insisted. You must have seen my doom. Doom? Garen said. What are you talking about? You're still alive. A doom doesn't always mean death, Beric said morosely, flinging himself into a large chair. I wish mine did. A doom is some terrible thing that's fated to happen to a man, and death's not the worst thing there is. You've just let the words of that crazy old blind woman take over your imagination, Garen said. It's not old Mart, Jay, Beric said. She's just repeating what everybody in Cherrick knows. An augurer was called in when I was born. It's the custom here. Most of the time, the auguries don't show anything at all, and nothing special is going to happen during the child's life. But sometimes the future lies so heavily on one that almost anyone can see the doom. That's just superstition, Garen scoffed. I've never seen any fortune teller who could even tell for sure if it's going to rain tomorrow. One of them came to Fowler's farm once and told Dernick that he was going to die twice. Isn't that silly? The augurers and soothsayers of Cherrick have more skill, Beric said, his face still sunk in melancholy. The doom they saw for me was always the same. I'm going to turn into a beast. I've had dozens of them tell me the same thing, and now it's happened. I've been sitting here for 2 days now watching. The hair on my body's getting longer, and my teeth are starting to get pointed. You're imagining things, Garen said. You look exactly the same to me as you always have. You're a kind boy, Garen, Beric said. I know you're just trying to make me feel better, but I've got eyes of my own. I know that my teeth are getting pointed, and my body's starting to grow fur. It won't be long until Enheg has to chain me up in his dungeon, so I won't be able to hurt anyone, or I'll have to run off into the mountains and live with the trolls. Nonsense, Garen insisted. Tell me what you saw the other day, Beric pleaded. What did I look like when I changed into a beast? All I saw were stars from banging my head on that tree, Garen said again, trying to make it sound true. I just want to know what kind of beast I'm turning into, Beric said, his voice thick with self-pity. Am I going to be a wolf, or a bear, or some kind of monster no one even has a name for? Don't you remember anything at all about what happened? Garen asked carefully, trying to blot the strange double image of Beric and the bear out of his memory. Nothing, Beric said. I heard you shouting, and the next thing I remember was the boar lying dead at my feet, and you lying under the tree with his blood all over you. I could feel the beast in me, though. I could even smell him. All you smelled was the boar, Garen said, and all that happened was that you lost your head in all the excitement. Berserk, you mean? Beric said, looking up hopefully. Then he shook his head. No, Garen, I've been berserk before. It doesn't feel at all the same. This was completely different, he sighed. You're not turning into a beast, Garen insisted. I know what I am, Beric said stubbornly. And then Lady Merrill, Beric's wife, stepped into the room through the still open door. I see that my lord is recovering his witch, she said. Leave me alone, Merrill, Beric said. I'm not in the mood for these games of yours.
Games, my lord, she said innocently. I'm simply concerned about my duties. If my lord is unwell, I'm obliged to care for him. That's a wife's right, isn't it?
Quit worrying so much about rights and duties, Merrill, Beric said. Just go away and leave me alone.
My lord was quite insistent about certain rights and duties on the night of his return to Val Alorn, she said. Not even the locked door of my bedchamber was enough to curb his insistence.
All right, Beric said, flushing slightly. I'm sorry about that. I'd hoped that things had changed between us. I was wrong. I won't bother you again.
Bother, my lord, she said. A duty is not a bother. A good wife is obliged to submit whenever her husband requires it of her, no matter how drunk or brutal he may be when he comes to her bed. No one will ever be able to accuse me of laxity in that regard.
You're enjoying this, aren't you? Beric accused.
Enjoying what, my lord? Her voice was light, but there was a cutting edge to it.
What do you want, Merrill? Beric demanded bluntly.
I want to serve my lord in his illness, she said. I want to care for him and watch the progress of his disease, each symptom as it appears.
Do you hate me that much? Beric asked with heavy contempt. Be careful, Merrill. I might take it into my head to insist that you stay with me. How would you like that? How would you like to be locked in this room with a raging beast?
If you grow unmanageable, my lord, I could always have you chained to the wall, she suggested, meeting his enraged glare with cool unconcern. Beric, Garion said uncomfortably, I have to talk to you.
Not now, Garion, Beric snapped.
It's important. There's a spy in the palace.
A spy?
A man in a green cloak, Garion said. I've seen him several times. Many men wear green cloaks, Lady, Merrill said.
Stay out of this, Merrill, Beric said. He turned to Garion. What makes you think he's a spy?
I saw him again this morning, Garion said, and I followed him. He was sneaking along a corridor that nobody seems to use. It passes above the hall where the kings are meeting with Mr. Wolf and Aunt Paul. He could hear every word they said.
How do you know what he could hear?
Oh, sorry. How do you know what he could hear? Merrill asked, her eyes narrowing. I was up there too, Garion said. I hid not far from him. I could hear them myself, almost as if I were in the same room with them.
What does he look like? Beric asked.
He has sandy-colored hair, Garion said, and a beard, and... As I said, he wears a green cloak. I saw him the day we went down to look at your ship. He was going into a tavern with a Murgo. There aren't any Murgos in Val Alorn, Merrill said. There's one, Garion said. I've seen him before. I know who he is. He had to move around the subject carefully. The compulsion not to speak about his dark-robed enemy was as strong as always. Even the hint he had given made his tongue seem stiff and his lips numb.
Who is he? Beric demanded.
Garion ignored the question. And then on the day of the boar hunt, I saw him in the forest.
The Murgo?
Beric asked. No, the man in the green cloak. He met some other man there. They talked for a while, not far from where I was waiting for the boar to come. They didn't see me.
There's nothing suspicious about that, Beric said. A man can meet with his friends anywhere he likes.
I don't think they were friends exactly, Garion said. The one in the green cloak called one of the others my lord, and that one was giving him orders to get close enough so that he could hear what Mr. Wolf and the kings were saying.
That's more serious, Beric said, seeming to forget his melancholy. Did they say anything else?
The flaxen-haired man wanted to know about us, Garion said. You, me, Dernick, Silk, all of us. Flaxen-colored hair? Merrill asked quickly. The one he called my lord, Garion explained. He seemed to know about us. He even knew about me. Long, pale-colored hair? Merrill demanded. No beard? A little older than Beric?
It couldn't be him, Beric said. Enheg had him banished on pain of death.
You're a child, Beric, she said. He'd ignore that if it suited him. I think we'd better tell the Enheg about this. Do you know about him? Garion asked. Some of the things he said about Beric weren't very polite. I can imagine, Merrill said ironically. Beric was one of those who said he ought to have his head removed. Beric was already pulling on his mail shirt. Fix your hair, Merrill told in a tone oddly had no lack of her former rancor in it. "You look like a haystack."
"I can't stop to fool with it now," Beric said impatiently. "Come along, both of you. We go to Engheg at once."
There was no time for any further questions, since Garion and Merrill almost had to run to keep up with Beric. So they swept through the great hall, and startled warriors scrambled out of their way after one look at Beric's face.
"My Lord Beric," one of the guards at the door of the council hall greeted the huge man. "One side," Beric commanded, and flung open the door with a crash.
King Engheg looked up, startled at the sudden interruption. "Welcome, cousin," he began.
"Treason, Engheg!" Beric roared. "The Earl of Jarvik has broken his banishment and set spies on you in your own palace."
"Jarvik?" Engheg said. "You wouldn't dare."
"He dared, all right," Beric said. "He's been seen not far from Val Alorn, and some of his plotting has been overheard."
"Who is this Jarvik?" the Riven warder asked.
"An earl I had banished last year," Engheg said. "One of his men was stopped, and we found a message on him. The message was to a Murgo in Sandaria, and it gave the details of one of our most secret councils. Jarvik tried to deny that the message was his, even though it had his own seal on it, and his strong room bulged with red gold from the mines of Cathal Murgos. I'd have had his head on a pole, but his wife's a kinswoman of mine, and she begged for his life. I banished him to one of his estates on the west coast instead." He looked at Beric. "How did you find out about this?" he asked. "Last I heard, you'd locked yourself in your room and wouldn't talk to anybody." "My husband's words are true, Engheg," Lady Merrill said in a voice that rang with challenge. "I don't doubt him, Merrill," Engheg said, looking at her with a faintly surprised expression. "I just wanted to know how he learned about Jarvik, that's all." "This boy from Sandaria saw him," Merrill said, "and heard him talk to his spy. I heard the boy's story myself and stand behind what my husband said, if anyone here dares to doubt him." "Garion?" Aunt Paul said, startled. "May I suggest that we hear from the lad," Chohag of the Algar said quietly. "A nobleman with a history of friendship for the Murgos, who chooses this exact moment to break his banishment, concerns us all, I think." Tell them what you told Merrill and me, Garion," Beric ordered, pushing Garion forward. "Your Majesty," Garion said, bowing awkwardly, "I've seen a man in a green cloak hiding here in your palace several times since we came here. He creeps along the passageways and takes a lot of trouble not to be seen. I saw him the first night we were here, and the next day I saw him going into a tavern in the city with a Murgo. Beric says there aren't any Murgos in Sherrick, but I know the man he was with was a Murgo." "How do you know?" Engheg said shrewdly. Garion looked at him helplessly, unable to say Asherak's name. "Well, boy?" King Rodar asked. Garion struggled with his words, but nothing would come out. "Maybe you know this Murgo," Silk suggested. Garion nodded, relieved that someone could help him. "You wouldn't know many Murgos," Silk said, rubbing his nose with one finger. "Was it one of the ones we met in Doreen, perhaps, and later in Morose, the one known as Asherak?" Garion nodded again. "Why didn't you tell us?" Beric asked. I couldn't," Garion stammered. "Couldn't?" "The words wouldn't come out," Garion said. "I don't know why, but I've never been able to talk about him." "Then you've seen him before?" Silk asked. "Yes," Garion said. "And you've never told anybody?" "No." Silk glanced quickly at Aunt Paul. "Is this the sort of thing you might know more about than we would, Polgara?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "It's possible to do it," she said. "It's never been very reliable, so I don't bother with it myself. It is possible, however." Her expression grew grim. "The Grolums think it's impressive," Mr. Wolf said. "Grolums are easily impressed." "Come with me, Garion," Aunt Paul said. "Not yet," Wolf said. "This is important," she said, her face hardening. "You can do it later," he said. "Let's hear the rest of his story first. The damage has already been done. Go ahead, Garion. What else did you see?" Garion took a deep breath. "All right," he said, relieved to be talking to the old man instead of the kings. "I saw the man in the green cloak again that day we all were hunting. He went into the forest with a yellow-haired man who doesn't wear a beard. They talked for a while, and I could hear what they were saying. The yellow-haired man wanted to know what
all of you were saying in this hall. You should have come to me immediately, King and Heg said. Anyway, Garion went on, I had that fight with the wild boar. I hit my head against a tree and was stunned. I didn't remember what I'd seen until this morning. After King Furlick called Dernick here, I went exploring. I was in a part of the palace where the roof is all fallen in, and I found some footprints. I followed them, and then after a while, I saw the man in the green cloak again. That was when I remembered all this. I followed him and went along a corridor that passes somewhere over the top of the hall. He hid up there and listened to what you were saying. How much do you think he could hear, Garion? King Chohag asked. You were talking about someone called the Apostate, Garion said, and you were wondering if he could use some power of some kind to awaken an enemy who's been asleep for a long time. Some of you thought you ought to warn the Arens and the Talnedrins, but Mr. Wolf didn't think so, and Dernick talked about how the men of Sandaria would fight if the Angarax came. They appeared startled. I was hiding not far from the man in the green cloak, Garion said. I'm sure he could hear everything that I could. Then some soldiers came and the man ran away. That's when I decided that I ought to tell Beric about all this. Up there, Silk said, standing near one of the walls and pointing at a corner of the ceiling of the hall. The mortars crumbled away. The sound of our voices carries right up through the cracks between the stones into the upper corridor. This is a valuable boy you've brought with you, Lady Pulgera, King Rodar said gravely. If he's looking for a profession, I think I might find a place for him. Gathering information is a rewarding occupation, and he seems to have certain natural gifts along those lines. He has some other gifts as well, Aunt Paul said. He seems to be very good at turning up in places where he's not supposed to be. Don't be too hard on the boy, Pulgera, King Enheg said. He's done us a service that we may never be able to repay. Garion bowed again and retreated from Aunt Paul's steady gaze. Cousin, Enheg said then to Beric, it seems that we have an unwelcome visitor somewhere in the palace. I think I'd like to have a little talk with the lurker in the green cloak. I'll take a few men, Beric said grimly. We'll turn your palace upside down and shake it and see what falls out. I'd like to have him more or less intact, Enheg cautioned. Of course, Beric said. Not too intact, however. As long as he's still able to talk, he'll serve our purposes. Beric grinned. I'll make sure that he's talkative when I bring him to you, cousin, he said. A bleak, answering grin touched Egheg's face, and Beric started toward the door, and Enheg turned to Beric's wife. I'd like to thank you also, Lady Merrill, he said. I'm sure you had a significant part in bringing this to us. I don't need... Thanks, Your Majesty, she said. It was my duty. Enheg sighed. Must it always be duty, Merrill? He asked sadly. What else is there? She asked. A very great deal, actually, the king said. But you're going to have to find out for yourself. Garion, Aunt Paul said, come here. Yes, ma'am, Garion said and went to her a little nervously. Don't be silly, dear, she said. I'm not going to hurt you. She put her fingertips lightly to his forehead. Well, Mr. Wolf asked. It's there, she said. It's very light, or I'd have noticed it before. I'm sorry, father. Let's see, Wolf said. He came closer and also touched Garion's head with his hand. It's not serious, he said. It could have been, Aunt Paul said. And it was my responsibility to see that something like this didn't happen. Don't flog yourself about it, Paul, Wolf said. That's very unbecoming. Just get rid of it. What's the matter? Garion asked, alarmed. It's nothing to worry about, dear, Aunt Paul said. She took his right hand and touched it for a moment to the white lock of her brow. Garion felt a surge, a welter of confused impressions, and then a tingling wrench behind his ears. A sudden dizziness swept over him, and he would have fallen if Aunt Paul had not caught him. Who is the Murgo? She asked, looking into his eyes. His name is Asherak, Garion said promptly. How long have you known him? All my life. He used to come to Fowler's farm and watch me when I was little. That's enough for now, Paul, Mr. Wolf said. Let him rest a little first. I'll fix something to keep it from happening again. Is the boy ill? King Chohag asked. It's not exactly an illness, Chohag, Mr. Wolf said. It's a little hard to explain. It's cleared up now, though. I want you to go to your room, Garion, Aunt Paul said, still holding him by the shoulders. Are you ready enough? Are you steady enough on your feet to get there by yourself? I'm all right, he said, still feeling a little lightheaded. No side trips and no more exploring, she said firmly. No, ma'am. When you get there, lie down. I want you to think back and remember every single time you've ever seen this Murgo, what he did, what he said. He never spoke to me, Garen said. He just watched. I'll be along in a little while, she went on, and I'll want you to tell me everything you know about him. It's important, Garen, so concentrate as hard as you can. All right, Aunt Paul, he said. Then she kissed him lightly on the forehead. Run along now, dear, she said. Feeling strangely lightheaded, Garen went to the door and out into the corridor. He passed through the great hall where Enheg's warriors were belting on swords and picking up vicious-looking battle axes in preparation for the search of the palace. Still bemused, he went through without stopping. Part of his mind seemed half asleep, but that secret inner part was wide awake. The dry voice observed that something significant had just happened. The powerful compulsion not to speak about Asherak was obviously gone. Aunt Paul had somehow pulled it out of his mind entirely. His feeling about that was oddly ambiguous. The strange relationship between himself and the dark-robed, silent Asherak had always been intensely private, and now it was gone. He felt vaguely empty and somehow violated. He sighed and went up the broad stairway toward his room. There were a half-dozen warriors in the hallway outside his room, probably part of Barrick's search for the man in the green cloak. Garen stopped. Something was wrong, and he shook off his half-daze. This part of the palace was much too populated to make it very likely that the spy would be hiding here. His heart began racing, and step by step he began to back away toward the top of the stairs he had just climbed. The warriors looked like any other Cherriks in the palace, bearded, dressed in helmets, mail shirts, and furs, but something didn't seem exactly right. A bulky man in a dark, hooded cloak stepped through the doorway of Garen's room in the corridor. It was Asherak. The Murgo was about to say something, but then his eyes fell on Garen. "Ah," he said softly. His dark eyes gleamed in his scarred face. "I've been looking for you, Garen," he said in that same soft voice. "Come here, boy." Garen felt a tentative tug at his mind that seemed to slip away, as if it somehow could not get a sure grip. He took his head mutely and continued to back away. "Come along now," Asherak said. "We've known each other far too long for this. Do as I say. You know that you must." The tug became a powerful grasp that again slipped away. "Come here, Garen," Asherak commanded harshly. Garen kept backing away step by step. "No," he said. Asherak's eyes blazed and he drew himself up angrily. This time it was not a tug or a grasp, but a blow. Garen could feel the force of it even as it seemed somehow to miss or be deflected. Asherak's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "Who did this?" he demanded. "Polgara? Belgarath? It won't do any good, Garen. I had you once, and I can take you again any time I want to. You're not strong enough to refuse me." Garen looked at his enemy and answered out of some need for defiance. "Maybe I'm not," he said, "but I think you'll have to catch me first." Asherak turned quickly to his warriors. "That's the boy I want," he barked sharply. "Take him!" Smoothly, almost as if it were done without thought, one of the warriors raised his bow and leveled an arrow directly at Garen. Asherak swung his arm quickly and knocked the bow aside just as the steel-pointed shaft was loosed. The arrow sang in the air and clattered across the stones of the wall a few feet to Garen's left. "Alive, idiots!" Asherak snarled and struck the bowman a crushing blow to the side of the head. The bowman fell twitching to the stone floor. Garen spun, dashed back to the stairs, and plunged down 3 steps at a time. He didn't bother to look back. The sound of heavy feet told him that Asherak and his men were after him. At the bottom of the stairs, he turned sharply to the left and fled down a long, dark passageway that led back into the maze of Enheg's palace.